How are you two doing today?
Pretty well, thanks.
Wow, I'd like to be inside your imaginations when you're putting this podcast together, because you have a way of sharing a story that when I'm driving and I'm listening, I'm in your world. I really have to pay attention to the lights and things, but I'm in your world. And how you've developed that relationship with listening, I want to know how.
Sarah's a real storyteller here. My experience is in sort of conveying to an audience, audio-wise and in person, right? I mean, I'm an on-air person. Sarah is a real storyteller, and I give her all the credit here.
Well, I'm not willing to take all the credit, but I will say, how we did it is we spent more than a year and a half in this world. I mean, I think Beth and I first entered this story in January 2022, and the last episode airs today, number 8. And so I think we worked very hard to create very close relationships with sources. We spent a huge amount of time just immersed in the ideas associated with this podcast, with the facts of the case. And, I think at times it's sort of overwhelming in its tragedy, but it never stopped being fascinating to us.
You keep reminding listeners, and this is so positive about the way that you have developed a story. You remind us of what's going on. You set us back up as to, okay, you're listening to this story. We're listening to Troy speak, but here's the reason why we're talking about this. And I love the way that you kind of remind us of why we're in this moment with you.
That's really important, right? Especially when people are listening to this a week apart. They need to be reminded too, but they need context. And, I used to be a trial attorney, and also then I was at Court TV, and I'm constantly explaining processes and stories to people and weaving things together and telling them why it's relevant. And of course, when you're telling a story and it's audio only and nobody's looking at pictures, you have to keep doing this and reminding them.
Yeah. 2014, Troy enters a world that no person really wants to be a part of, but now he's got to deal with it. When you sat down with him, I can't imagine, how did he keep his emotions together and so peacefully? Because I really did listen to his voice very clearly.
So, I think I have 2 things to say about that. One, he has become, he's both a grieving father and he's also an advocate. Mm-hmm. And he is very, very determined when it comes to his children and any form of advocacy associated with that. So he has learned to essentially professionalize his grief, which a lot of victims or families of victims have to do if they want to enact any kind of change. The other thing I would say is he doesn't always keep his emotion under control. I think it's if you listen to the podcast all the way to the end, you do hear moments where he is heartbroken and frustrated, and you really, really feel the impossibility of his situation. But he has been forced to essentially perform over the last 9 years because, while he's had assistance and obviously this case has been working its way through the criminal justice system, he is the primary advocate for his children. And so you kind of have to learn to get good at that fast.
Wow. And the way that you carry us forward, because when that, I can physically hear a clock ticking, that it's like, oh my God, we're running out of time, that Catherine could actually be free here. What is going on here? And so the way that you built up the storyline and making sure that we stay to it, it's like I want to figure it out before you guys figure it out, but you put the year and a half of your life into it. And then we get the 8 episodes. So how do you feel about that we're done in 8 episodes where you've had to live it?
Well, and we are still, living it, you don't ever put it away. It was a challenge, first of all, living it for a year and a half and then condensing it to 30-minute episodes, was a challenge because we couldn't tell everything we know. We couldn't use everyone we talked to. And we also had to, draw you, the listener, in and make you want to listen to the next episode and just stay engaged. But it is something that I think I probably speak for both of us when I say that this story will always stay with us and what we learned from it. We don't have answers, but we just wanted to explore and shine a light on the intersection of mental illness and the criminal justice system.
Do you think one of the reasons why we are into this story so much is because every community has something like this going on where a crime has been committed, but because of laws and because of things that are happening inside those courtrooms, it doesn't go to court? And it's like, because I'm here in the Carolinas. We're always hearing stories like this.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think these stories are relatable. And for that reason, but also I think because, mental illness is an epidemic. And I think a lot of people have family members who they feel is on a precipice. And I think, sometimes you can't get the help you need. Sometimes you cannot see that person is becoming harmful to themselves or others. So I think that there are a lot of touch points for this story. I think that there are a lot of people who are let down by systems, and that includes individuals with mental illness, the families of those individuals with mental illness, victims in the context of the criminal justice system. There's a lot of these things don't work as well for people as they can or should. And that is part of what we wanted to look at. Yeah,
because you paint the picture. Because before, we can read it in a newspaper or watch it on television, but there really is a valley between criminal justice versus the mental health system. They're not as close as what some people might think it is.
Our prisons are full of mentally ill people.
Yes.
And it's probably fair to say that, most violent crimes, at least, are committed by people who are not well, maybe just not well in the moment. They may be suffering a depression, or they just snap in some way. But mental illness is, it is an epidemic, as Sarah says, but our prisons are just, full of very sick people. And what do you do? When I was a prosecutor in New York City, I used to look out on the sea of faces, and I would feel so bad. And I'd say, I'm not a social worker. I'm not a psychologist. I can't solve the problems these people have. My job is to protect society and keep society safe, New York City safe, by punishing these people who are out there committing crimes. But some, you wonder, did they all deserve the punishment they got? Should they have received some treatment? I don't know what the answers are. And we're constantly working toward making it better. There are now mental health courts here in New York. I just learned we have them now. They didn't have them when I was a prosecutor in Manhattan, but they have them in Maryland, where this story takes place. The system's trying to grapple with it constantly, but we're always sort of behind the eight ball, it seems.
Yeah. In the everyday world, people are always asking me, so what podcast you're listening to? What podcast? And so I said Unrestorable, and they're going, well, how do you best describe it? And so bad I want to say, well, it's a mystery. But not only is it a mystery, but it's a whodunit. Whodunit in the way of did she, why did she? And they look at me and it's like, how do you best describe when people say, so you've got a podcast? What is it about?
It's such a complex story.
Right?
And, we've been doing this for a year and a half. I can speak for myself when I say I'm still trying to perfect an elevator speech, because I always want to tack on all these other dimensions for kids in the case. But, I think fundamentally it's about a family in crisis. It's about a mother with a long history of mental illness. It's about a moment that no one expected, a violent moment that no one expected. And then the repercussions that have rippled across, not just a family, but these, as we just discussed, relatable repercussions, our perceptions of competency, what it means to be held accountable, who should be made responsible for their actions, and how we best deal with mentally ill defendants. And then what do the victims and their families do when they do not feel like their needs are adequately served by the system, when they feel like a defendant is being protected?
Yeah.
And is that because those are reasonable expectations, or is it because we have a uniquely, and particularly in the United States, there's a uniquely punitive idea of justice, that in order to be accountable, you must be punished? And I think all of these questions are really worth examining.
You talk about the unexpected. You receiving that Facebook message. Now people are going to be reaching out to you left and right going, hey, I need you to help me with my story.
Well, it happens more often than you might think. And, I think this is also a really interesting kind of meta-analysis we get into a little bit at the end of the podcast. But, I think a lot of people, when they become desperate, they turn to the media because they feel let down by these systems. Mm-hmm. And so they think perhaps they can turn to people with some sort of ability to get their story out into the public and help them advocate for whatever whatever resolution they're looking for. And so I think it happens pretty often. People often ask me where, the things that I write about and where my stories come from, and a not disproportionate amount come from individuals who are in some sort of somewhat desperate situation, who need help and think maybe I can help them by telling their story.
We're going through this golden age of television, but at the same time, I also believe that we're going through the silent golden age of journalism. And I wish that this world would embrace the fact that you guys are putting your lives out there and getting a story and it's not a 3-minute story on the 5 o'clock news. I mean, you are getting the story.
Well, I mean, that's what we do, right? I mean, we investigate, we take a real deep dive into a story, and, are using the best way we can to communicate that story. And here we thought it was most effective in a podcast, and we're very grateful to iHeart to have produced this for us. But I'm used to that, and Sarah is too. I mean, this is what we do in our separate lives as journalists, is we go really inside a story, and it's nice to have a platform and the ability to be able to really deliver it and not just do it in a 3-minute package.
Yeah, the reason why I brought that up is because I'm a broadcast instructor, and every one of these, I love them all. They all think they're superstars after day number 1. They're ready to podcast, and you go, okay, what do you want to do? I need a good investigative story. And they look at me going, oh, I don't have that kind of time. And that always inspires me to share conversations with people like yourself, because you do find the time. And the thing about it is, I always want to know the afterlife of an investigation podcast like this, because your information, can it be used in a court if there's a future case here?
Well, I'm going to throw that question to Beth, because I think she's best with the answer.
I do want to say, first of all, that, a friend of mine who's executive director of the Ohio Innocence Project told me he's noticed in the last years a lack of investigative journalism. I'm sure he's not alone. I mean, he needs investigative journalists to help him get the stories out there that they don't have time to work on because they're stretched so thin. This is the Ohio Innocence Project. But I'm sure that other areas are finding this. There aren't enough people who are taking the time to really investigate a story. And we are too who do that. But you're right, I'm sure. And, your students want to, they're used to, there's a Twitter, and they're used to like sort of quick stories and, getting something out there in 2 minutes, and their attention span is not what ours is, for example. But whether or not our podcast can be used in a courtroom, some of the information, I think that, we talked to some of the, nation's experts in mental illness and forensic issues. So, I think there are things there that you can glean, somebody could use, perhaps. I don't know that we would ever be witnesses, but the people we talk to might be consulted in future cases in the courtroom.
In that year and a half, because you both have evolved into basically much wiser people in the way that when you first came up with the idea of putting this podcast together, I mean, to just go out and get an expert to talk to you had to have been a heck of a journey. But now that you've got something that you can really give them to hold on to, does it open up the door easier for you for future shows?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes. But I'll say, we were very fortunate with this project. This is the second podcast that Beth and I have worked on together. Yep. And, I think we're both pretty grateful that we had iHeart and Anonymous Content, our partners on this, invest sufficiently that we were really able to immerse ourselves in it. But I think access is like, and then this, if you're teaching students, access is really crucial when it comes to journalism. Yep. I don't mean trading something for access. I mean people who are willing to tell you their story, and who are committed to whatever project you invite them into. And we had a huge amount of access in working on this podcast. We spoke to a lot of family members. We spoke to the state's attorney. We spoke to Catherine's attorney. We spoke to some other experts who have touched on this case, and others who write about the phenomenon more broadly. And I think the thing is, yes, sometimes sources don't yield to you as easily as really they did in this story for us. We had a lot of open doors. I think in part because it's such a compelling case. Yep. And but it's crucial. You really need to secure as much access as possible to make to convey a compelling story. Yeah. We always knew it was compelling. It was a question of how we adequately convey it to a listener. And I think, all the access we had was really crucial to that.
I just wanted to add that we are hearing, Sarah and I, from professionals who are thanking us for doing this story.
Wow. See, that's what it's all about. That to me is the new level of community when it comes to broadcasting. And I know that a lot of podcasters always come after me saying, we're not broadcasters, we're podcasters. Okay, I get it. But we're bringing a different level of success to what they used to use as just a hobby. You are not a hobby. You're sharing stories.
Yeah, I think it's when you do any form of investigative journalism, I mean any form of journalism, period, but investigative journalism comes with a pretty high level of responsibility. And we really did keep in mind the whole time that we were telling this story. We are not advocates, we're journalists. And we really, really tried to do justice to our sources, to the story itself, and again, to the very complex nested issues associated with this case.
I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to talk with different subjects. And the reason why is because what I really wanted to do was come on here and ask about the final episode, number 8. And the thing, but I'm so glad that we did not go in that direction, because I need, as a listener, to experience it and not have it come through, a conversation like this. So thank you for not taking us down number 8. I want people to experience it.
Yeah, I mean, we want people to experience it too. We want them to sort of take the journey. When we started this podcast, even when we started writing, we did not know how things were going to end.
Yeah.
And we also were on a journey. We joined this story when it was unclear what was going to happen next to Catherine Hoggle, to this family. And so, we hope the listeners will sort of will find it as compelling as we did as we watched the clock while we were researching this.
Yeah. Wow. You got to come back to the show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.